The sound of Richard Blackwood's body hitting the marble floor echoed through the grand entrance hall of his $50 million mansion like a gunshot. 20 of the world's most expensive doctors stood frozen around him, their faces pale with panic as the tech billionaire convulsed on the cold stone, his eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. "Get back. Give him space," Dr. Peterson shouted, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. The other specialists pushed against each other, each trying to assert their expertise while their patient writhed helplessly beneath them. Nyla Washington pressed herself against the wall, her cleaning supplies forgotten as she watched the chaos unfold. She had only been working at the mansion for 3 weeks, and this was beyond anything she had ever witnessed. The doctors who had been flown in from around the world, specialists whose single consultations cost more than she made in a year, looked as lost as children. "His pulse is erratic," called out Dr. Singh, the cardiologist from London whose accent made everything sound important. "Blood pressure dropping fast," added Dr. Mueller from Germany, sweat beading on his forehead despite the mansion's perfect climate control. Richard's body went rigid, his back arching off the floor in a way that made Nyla's stomach turn. His expensive suit was torn at the shoulder where he had fallen, and a thin line of foam appeared at the corner of his mouth. The man who had revolutionized the tech industry, who had built an empire worth $43 billion, was reduced to this, a suffering body that the best medical minds couldn't fix. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately," Dr. Chin from Johns Hopkins declared, but Dr. Reeves from Harvard shook his head violently. "Moving him now could kill him. We don't know what's causing this." Nyla watched as 20 brilliant doctors argued while their patients suffered. For 2 weeks, they had been living in the mansion's guest wing, running test after test, spending millions on equipment that filled 3 entire rooms. MRI machines, blood analyzers, specialist computers that cost more than most people's houses. Yet here was Richard Blackwood, convulsing on his own floor while they debated. "Should I call 911? James, the butler, asked with trembling hands. "No," several doctors shouted at once, their professional pride wounded at the suggestion that paramedics might succeed where they had failed. Nyla had grown up in a small apartment in Detroit, where doctors were a luxury her family couldn't afford. Her grandmother had taught her to pay attention to signs, to trust her instincts, to look for simple answers when everyone else was making things complicated. Right now, every instinct she had was screaming that these doctors were missing something obvious. Richard's convulsions slowed, then stopped. For a terrifying moment, everyone thought the worst had happened. Then his chest rose and fell with shallow, rapid breaths. Dr. Peterson knelt beside him, checking his pulse with shaking fingers. "He's stable for now, but barely," he announced. "We need to figure out what's wrong before this happens again." The doctors began speaking in medical terms that Nyla didn't understand, throwing around words like idiopathic seizure disorder and autoimmune encephalitis. She watched them scatter like ants, rushing to their equipment, ordering new tests, making phone calls to colleagues around the world. But none of them were looking at the obvious things. None of them were asking the simple questions. They were so focused on finding a rare, complex disease that they were blind to anything straightforward. As the medical team worked, Nyla quietly approached Richard, who was now unconscious on the floor. His face was pale, almost gray, and his breathing was so shallow she had to lean close to see his chest moving. This was her employer, the man who had hired her despite her lack of formal experience, who had been kind to her in the brief interactions they'd had. She noticed something the doctors hadn't, a faint smell on his breath, sweet but wrong, like fruit that was starting to turn. Her grandmother had always said to trust all your senses when someone was sick, not just what the machines could tell you. "Ma'am, please step back," Dr. Singh said firmly, finally noticing her proximity to the patient. "This is a medical emergency." Nyla moved away, but her mind was already working. The smell, Richard's symptoms, the way his skin looked almost waxy in the bright lights of the chandelier above them. Something about it reminded her of her cousin Jerome, back when he was sick and nobody could figure out why. The doctors were preparing to move Richard to his bedroom, where they had set up their temporary medical facility. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, his head lolled to one side, and Nyla saw something else. His fingernails had a strange color to them, not quite blue but not normal either. "Is anyone writing down his symptoms?" she asked quietly, surprising herself with her boldness. Dr. Peterson looked at her like she had suggested bloodletting. "Miss, we appreciate your concern, but this requires medical expertise. We have everything documented." But as they carried Richard upstairs, Nyla noticed that none of them had mentioned the smell, or the color of his nails, or the way his skin looked under the lights. They were so focused on their machines and their theories that they weren't seeing the person right in front of them. She followed at a distance as they settled Richard into his bedroom, which had been transformed into something resembling a high-tech hospital room. Monitors beeped constantly, for lines ran from multiple machines, and the doctors huddled around computer screens showing test results that apparently told them nothing useful. 2 weeks, she heard Dr. Mueller say to Dr. Peterson. 2 weeks of testing and we're no closer to a diagnosis than when we started. The blood work shows some irregularities but nothing conclusive, Dr. Peterson replied, his frustration evident. The neurological tests are inconclusive. The toxicology screens came back clean. Maybe we need to consider psychiatric factors, suggested Dr. Yamamoto from Tokyo. Conversion disorder can present with physical symptoms. Several other doctors nodded and Nyla felt a flash of anger. They were ready to dismiss Richard's illness as being in his head rather than admit they might be wrong about something. As night fell, the doctors took shifts monitoring Richard, but it was clear they had no real plan. They were just watching and waiting, hoping something would reveal itself. Nyla finished her cleaning duties for the day, but instead of going home to her small apartment, she asked James if she could stay in the staff quarters. I want to be here in case something happens, she explained. In case they need help with anything. James, who had worked for the Blackwood family for 15 years, looked at her with surprise and something that might have been respect. That's very thoughtful of you, Miss Washington. Mr. Blackwood would appreciate knowing you care. As the mansion settled into an uneasy quiet, with only the sounds of medical equipment and hushed conversations between doctors, Nyla lay awake in the small staff bedroom, thinking about what she had observed. The smell on Richard's breath, the color of his nails, the way his skin looked, the pattern of his symptoms. Somewhere in her memory, pieces were trying to come together. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, "Sometimes the answer is right in front of you, baby girl. Sometimes what looks complicated is really just simple dressed-up fancy." In the morning she would have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. Whether to trust her instincts or defer to the experts. Whether to risk her job to possibly save her employer's life. But right now, as she listened to the sounds of confusion and frustration from the doctors down the hall, Nyla Washington knew that 20 brilliant minds had missed something important. And she was starting to think she knew what it was. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Blackwood mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors that Nyla usually spent her time cleaning. But today, those floors remained untouched as she watched the circus of medical expertise continue its futile dance around Richard Blackwood's bedside. Dr. Peterson stood at the foot of the bed, his expensive suit wrinkled from sleeping in a chair all night, addressing his assembled colleagues like a general briefing his troops before a battle they were already losing. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice hoarse with exhaustion, "we are dealing with a case that challenges everything we know about modern medicine. Our patient has now experienced 17 episodes of varying severity over the past 14 days. Nyla counted along silently from her position near the door where she was pretending to dust the same table for the third time. She had been keeping her own careful record of Richard's symptoms, writing them down in a small notebook she kept hidden in her cleaning supplies. The blood chemistry panels continued to show minor fluctuations, but nothing that explains the severity of his condition, Dr. Singh added, consulting his tablet with the intensity of someone reading a death sentence. "Have we considered Wilson's disease?" suggested Dr. Rodriguez from Mexico City, a specialist in rare metabolic disorders who had arrived just yesterday on Richard's private jet. Dr. Peterson shook his head. "Copper levels are normal. We've tested for everything: Huntington's, multiple sclerosis, lupus, every autoimmune condition in the textbook." "What about environmental factors?" Dr. Mueller interjected. "Perhaps something in the mansion itself? Mold, chemicals, electromagnetic fields from all his technology?" Nyla watched as they nodded thoughtfully, as if this was a brilliant new direction rather than something any sensible person would have considered on day one. They had spent the equivalent of a small country's annual budget on tests, but they hadn't bothered to ask basic questions about Richard's daily routine, his diet, or his environment. "We've had environmental specialists sweep the entire property," Dr. Peterson replied. "Air quality, water quality, electromagnetic readings, everything came back within normal parameters." Richard stirred on the bed, and immediately 5 doctors rushed to his side with various instruments. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, the way they had been during every brief moment of consciousness over the past 2 weeks. "Mr. Blackwood, can you hear me?" Dr. Peterson asked, leaning close to Richard's face. Richard's mouth moved, but only a whisper came out. The doctors leaned closer, straining to hear. "Water," he managed to say, his voice barely audible. "Get him some water," Dr. Singh ordered, and a nurse hurried to comply. But as Richard tried to drink, his hand trembled so violently that most of the water spilled onto his chest. His eyes rolled back again and another seizure began, milder than the day before but still terrifying to watch. Nyla stepped forward instinctively, wanting to help, but Dr. Chen held up a hand to stop her. "Please maintain distance from the patient," he said firmly. "This is a sterile environment." Sterile environment. Nyla looked around at the 20 doctors who had been in and out of this room for 2 weeks, the nurses who changed shifts, the technicians who operated the machines, the cleaning staff who had been allowed in until yesterday. If this was supposed to be sterile, they were doing a terrible job of it. The seizure passed and Richard fell back into unconsciousness. The doctors resumed their huddle, speaking in hushed tones about medication adjustments and new tests they wanted to try. "I think we should consider experimental treatments," Dr. Yamamoto suggested. "There's a new protocol being tested in Switzerland for neurological disorders of unknown origin." Experimental treatments on a patient this prominent? Dr. Reeves looked horrified. "The liability alone could destroy our careers." "Our careers are already at risk," Dr. Peterson snapped. "We have 20 of the world's leading medical minds in this room, and we can't diagnose a single patient. The media is starting to ask questions." Nyla had seen the reporters gathering outside the mansion gates, their cameras and microphones ready to catch any hint of what was happening inside. Richard Blackwood was too famous, too important, for his illness to remain secret much longer. "Maybe we need to consider that this isn't a medical condition at all," Dr. Singh said quietly. "Maybe someone is poisoning him." The room fell silent. It was the first time anyone had spoken the word that had been lurking in everyone's mind for days. "Poison?" Dr. Peterson looked incredulous. "Our toxicology screens have been comprehensive. We've tested for everything from arsenic to exotic plant alkaloids." "Not everything," Dr. Rodriguez corrected. "There are compounds that break down quickly in the body, substances that wouldn't show up in standard tests." "Are you suggesting someone in this household is attempting murder?" Dr. Chen asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Nyla felt her heart racing. The doctors were looking around the room suspiciously, and she realized they were all thinking the same thing. Who had access to Richard's food, his drinks, his personal items? Who could slip something dangerous into his system without being noticed? The staff. People like her. "We should inform the police," Dr. Mueller said. "If there's even a possibility of foul play." "Absolutely not," Dr. Peterson interrupted. "Do you have any idea what that would do to our reputations? To his company's stock price? We need to be certain before we make such accusations." "Then what do you suggest?" Dr. Singh asked, frustrated. "We continue this charade while our patient slowly dies?" "We expand our testing," Dr. Peterson declared. "We bring in specialists from other fields. Forensic toxicologists, environmental scientists, even alternative medicine practitioners if necessary." Alternative medicine practitioners. Nyla almost laughed out loud. These doctors had spent 2 weeks dismissing anything that wasn't in their textbooks, and now they were ready to consider alternatives because their expertise had failed them. As the doctors continued their debate, Nyla noticed something they had missed again. Richard's breathing had changed. It was still shallow, but the rhythm was different, more labored. And there was that smell again, stronger now, sweet and wrong. She looked at his hands, which were lying on top of the expensive silk bedsheets. His fingernails definitely had a blue tint to them, more pronounced than yesterday. And his skin, under the bright lights they had brought in for their examinations, had an almost waxy quality that reminded her of something. Her cousin Jerome. 5 years ago, when he had gotten sick and the emergency room doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. He had looked just like this, the pale skin, the blue nails, the sweet smell on his breath. The doctors had run test after test just like this until her grandmother had finally spoken up. "Excuse me," Nyla said, her voice cutting through the medical discussion. All 20 doctors turned to look at her, their faces showing various degrees of annoyance at the interruption. "I'm sorry," she continued, her heart pounding but her voice steady, "but I think I might know what's wrong with him." Dr. Peterson's expression could have frozen water. "Miss Washington, while we appreciate your concern for Mr. Blackwood's welfare, this is a complex medical situation that requires—" "I know what you're going to say," Nyla interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "That I don't have training, that I don't understand medicine, that I should leave this to the experts. But you've been here for 2 weeks and he's getting worse." "The audacity," Dr. Singh muttered under his breath. What exactly do you think you know? Dr. Chen asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring a child. Nyla took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where she either helped save Richard's life or lost her job and probably any chance of working for a wealthy family again. I think he's diabetic, she said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Dr. Peterson began to laugh, a sound so condescending it made Nyla's cheeks burn with embarrassment. Diabetic? He repeated. Miss Washington, diabetes is one of the first things we test for. Mr. Blackwood's blood glucose levels have been monitored constantly. They're perfectly normal. Are they? Nyla asked, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. Or are they normal because his body isn't processing sugar the way it should? Dr. Mueller looked confused. That makes no medical sense. Maybe not to you, Nyla said, her confidence growing despite their dismissive attitudes. But my cousin had the same symptoms. The same smell on his breath, the same color to his nails. The doctors couldn't figure it out either, until my grandmother suggested they test him differently. And what did your grandmother suggest? Dr. Yamamoto asked, barely concealing his sarcasm. Test his blood sugar when he's having symptoms, not just during regular monitoring. Test it multiple times during an episode. Look at how his body is responding to the glucose, not just what the levels are. Dr. Peterson waved a dismissive hand. We've done continuous glucose monitoring. If he were diabetic, we would have seen it by now. But what if it's not regular diabetes? Nyla persisted. What if something is interfering with his insulin production, or his body's ability to use it? What if his pancreas is failing gradually, and your tests are missing it because you're looking for the wrong patterns? The doctors exchanged glances, and for the first time, Nyla saw a flicker of uncertainty in their confident facades. Even if that were possible, Dr. Singh said slowly, which it isn't, the treatment would be simple insulin therapy. We would have seen improvement by now. Would you? Nyla asked. Have you tried treating him for diabetes? Another long silence. The answer was written on their faces. In all their complex theories and expensive tests, they hadn't tried the simplest solution. Miss Washington, Dr. Peterson said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, I understand that you're concerned about your employer, but medical diagnosis is not a matter of guesswork or folk wisdom. It requires years of training, sophisticated equipment, and rigorous scientific method. And how's that working out for you? Nyla asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Richard lay unconscious between them, living proof that all their training and equipment and scientific method hadn't been enough. James appeared in the doorway, having heard the raised voices. Is everything all right? He asked, looking concerned. Miss Washington was just sharing her medical opinions with us, Dr. Peterson said coldly. Perhaps it would be best if she returned to her regular duties. Nyla felt the dismissal like a slap, but she wasn't ready to give up. Richard's life was at stake, and she knew in her bones that she was right. Just try it, she said, looking directly at Dr. Peterson. What do you have to lose? Test his blood sugar during his next episode. Give him insulin. See what happens. We don't experiment on patients based on hunches from household staff, Dr. Chin snapped. No, Nyla replied, her voice growing stronger. You just let them die while you protect your professional pride. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted them. But they were true, and everyone in the room knew it. Dr. Peterson's face turned red with anger. James, please escort Miss Washington out of this room. Immediately. As James gently took her arm, Nyla looked back at Richard, lying pale and still in the bed surrounded by 20 brilliant doctors who refused to consider that they might be wrong. His breath smells like fruit, she said as James led her toward the door. Sweet like overripe fruit. That's what ketoacidosis smells like. My grandmother taught me that. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving her alone in the hallway with James and the sound of urgent medical discussion resuming behind the closed door. That was brave, James said quietly. That was stupid, Nyla replied, leaning against the wall. I just lost my job trying to help someone who doesn't even know I exist. Don't be so sure about that, James said, giving her a thoughtful look. Mr. Blackwood notices more than people think. And right now, I think you might be the only person in this house who's actually trying to save his life instead of their own reputation. As they stood in the hallway, they could hear the doctors' voices rising behind the door, animated discussion replacing the defeated tones of moments before. Maybe, just maybe, someone was finally listening. But Nyla wasn't holding her breath. She had seen how pride could blind people to simple truths. The question now was whether Richard Blackwood would survive long enough for his doctors to swallow theirs. The staff quarters at the Blackwood mansion were comfortable but modest, a stark contrast to the luxury of the main house. Nyla sat on the edge of her temporary bed, staring at the small notebook where she had been recording her observations about Richard's condition. James had brought her dinner on a tray, insisting that she shouldn't leave the estate just yet. "The doctors are still discussing your suggestions," he had told her earlier. Dr. Peterson seemed quite agitated, but some of the others appeared interested. Now, as evening shadows lengthened outside her small window, Nyla heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly hid her notebook under her pillow, expecting James or perhaps security coming to escort her off the property. Instead, a soft knock came at her door. "Miss Washington? It's Dr. Rodriguez. May I speak with you?" Nyla opened the door to find the metabolic specialist standing in the hallway, looking tired and uncertain. He was younger than the other doctors, maybe in his early 40s, with kind eyes that seemed less arrogant than his colleagues. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said carefully. "I hope I'm not in trouble." "Please call me Miguel," he said with a slight smile. "And no, you're not in trouble. I was hoping we could talk about your observations regarding Mr. Blackwood." Nyla gestured for him to enter, though the small room barely had space for two people to sit comfortably. "I want to apologize for how my colleagues treated you today," Miguel began. "Your suggestions weren't given the consideration they deserved. They think I'm just a maid who doesn't know anything about medicine," Nyla replied. "Maybe they're right. Medical knowledge comes in many forms," Miguel said thoughtfully. "Some of the most important discoveries in medicine have come from simple observations, not complex theories. Tell me about your cousin Jerome." Nyla found herself relaxing as she told Miguel about Jerome's illness 5 years earlier, how the emergency room doctors had run every test imaginable while her grandmother sat quietly in the corner, watching and listening. "She didn't say anything for 3 days," Nyla explained. "She just observed. She watched how Jerome reacted to different foods, how his breathing changed at different times of day, how his skin looked under different lights. Then she asked one simple question that changed everything." "What question?" "She asked if anyone had tested his blood sugar right after he ate something sweet. Not hours later, not the next morning, but immediately after. The doctors said it didn't matter, that they had tested his glucose levels multiple times. But she insisted." Miguel leaned forward, interested despite himself. "So they tested him right after he drank a soda, and his blood sugar shot up to over 400. But 30 minutes later, it crashed to dangerous lows. He wasn't producing enough insulin to handle the sugar, but he was producing enough to make his regular tests look normal." "Type 1 diabetes with delayed onset," Miguel murmured. "It's rare in adults, but it happens." Once they knew what it was, the treatment was simple. Insulin injections, dietary changes. He was fine within a week. Miguel was quiet for a moment, thinking. "The symptoms you mentioned, the fruity breath, the blue-tinged nails, the skin changes, those are all consistent with diabetic ketoacidosis. That's what I've been trying to tell everyone," Nyla said. "But I'm just the maid." "You're someone who cares enough to pay attention," Miguel corrected. "Someone who isn't blinded by preconceptions or professional ego." He stood up, pacing the small room as much as the space allowed. "I've been thinking about what you said all day," he admitted. "We have been focusing on rare diseases, exotic conditions because that's what medical conferences and journals celebrate. But medicine is supposed to be about helping patients, not proving how smart we are." "So you believe me?" Miguel hesitated. "I believe your observations deserve investigation. But convincing the others will be difficult. Dr. Peterson has built his reputation on being infallible. Admitting that a maid diagnosed what 20 specialists missed would be challenging for him." "What about Mr. Blackwood?" Nyla asked. "Isn't his life more important than Dr. Peterson's reputation?" "Of course it is," Miguel said quickly. "But you have to understand the dynamics at play here. These are some of the most prominent doctors in the world. Their egos are as large as their expertise." A commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation. They could hear urgent voices, footsteps running, medical equipment being moved quickly. "Another episode," Miguel said, his face grim. "They're getting more frequent." "And worse," Nyla added. "I've been keeping track. The time between episodes is decreasing, and they're lasting longer each time." Miguel looked at her with surprise. "You've been keeping track?" Nyla pulled out her notebook from under the pillow, showing him the careful record she had been maintaining. Times, duration, severity, observations about Richard's condition before and after each episode. "This is remarkable," Miguel said, studying her notes. You've documented patterns that we missed completely. Because you weren't looking for them, Nyla said simply. You were looking for complicated answers to what might be a simple problem. Miguel stood up decisively. I need to get back to the medical team. Will you come with me? Dr. Peterson made it very clear that I wasn't welcome. Dr. Peterson isn't the only doctor here, Miguel said firmly. And right now, you might be the only person who can help Mr. Blackwood. They made their way through the mansion's corridors toward Richard's bedroom, passing servants who looked worried and confused. The usual calm efficiency of the household had been replaced by an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. Outside Richard's room, they could hear Dr. Peterson's voice raised in frustration. This is the worst episode yet. His blood pressure is dropping, his heart rate is erratic. We need to consider emergency transport to Johns Hopkins. Moving him could kill him, Dr. Singh argued. We need to stabilize him here first. With what? Dr. Chin demanded. We don't even know what we're treating. Miguel squeezed Nyla's shoulder reassuringly before opening the door and entering the medical chaos. Richard was convulsing on the bed, his body rigid with seizure activity. The monitors around him were beeping frantically, showing dangerous fluctuations in all his vital signs. The 20 doctors stood around him looking helpless, their expensive equipment unable to provide the answers they desperately needed. How long has this been going on? Miguel asked. 12 minutes, Dr. Peterson replied without looking up from the monitors. Longest episode yet. We've given him anti-seizure medication, but it's not helping. Have you checked his blood glucose? Miguel asked quietly. Why would we check his blood glucose? Dr. Peterson snapped. We've been monitoring it continuously. It's normal. Check it now, Miguel insisted. Right now during the episode. Dr. Peterson looked at him like he had lost his mind, but Dr. Singh was already reaching for a glucose meter. Blood sugar is 380, Dr. Singh announced, his voice shocked. That's impossible, Dr. Peterson said. The continuous monitor shows normal levels. Check the continuous monitor, Miguel ordered. Dr. Chin examined the device attached to Richard's arm. It's malfunctioned. The readings have been wrong for hours. A collective intake of breath from the assembled doctors. 4 hours they had been relying on faulty equipment, missing the most basic vital sign in diabetes management. Test for ketones, Miguel said urgently. The test strip turned dark purple immediately, indicating dangerously high levels of ketones in Richard's blood. Diabetic ketoacidosis, Dr. Singh whispered. Severe diabetic ketoacidosis. That's impossible, Dr. Peterson repeated, but his voice had lost its conviction. We tested for diabetes. Multiple times. We tested for diabetes in a controlled environment, Miguel corrected. We never looked at his insulin response during stress, during episodes when his body was actually failing. Richard's convulsions began to slow as his blood sugar reached critical levels. His breathing became shallow and rapid, the classic signs of a body struggling to compensate for severe acidosis. We need insulin, Dr. Rodriguez announced. Fast-acting insulin, 4 fluids, and continuous monitoring. Are you certain? Dr. Peterson asked, his authority crumbling in the face of a diagnosis he had missed. Miguel looked toward the door where Nyla stood watching, her face full of concern for her employer. I'm certain, he said firmly. And I'm not the only one who recognized the symptoms. Dr. Peterson followed his gaze and saw Nyla in the doorway. For a moment, understanding and embarrassment warred on his face. Begin insulin therapy, he ordered quietly. And someone fix that glucose monitor. As the medical team sprang into action with a clear treatment plan for the first time in 2 weeks, Miguel approached Nyla. You saved his life, he said simply. We all did, Nyla replied, watching as Richard's vital signs began to stabilize under proper treatment. I just helped them see what was right in front of them all along. But as she watched the doctors work with renewed purpose and confidence, Nyla knew that something had changed in the Blackwood mansion. The woman they had dismissed as just a maid had proven that wisdom didn't always come with medical degrees, and that sometimes the most important observations came from the most unexpected sources. Richard Blackwood's road to recovery was just beginning, but for the first time in 2 weeks, there was real hope in the room. And it had come from the most unlikely place of all. The insulin began working within an hour. Richard's convulsions stopped, his breathing steadied, and his blood sugar levels started dropping toward normal ranges. The room that had been filled with panic and confusion now hummed with quiet efficiency as the medical team monitored his progress. Nyla remained in the hallway, not wanting to intrude on the medical procedures but unable to leave while Richard's condition remained critical. James brought her a chair and a cup of coffee, settling beside her as they waited for news. 20 years I've worked in this house, James said quietly. I've seen Mr. Blackwood handle billion-dollar deals, negotiate with world leaders, solve problems that seemed impossible. But I've never seen him as helpless as he's been these past 2 weeks. He's going to be okay now, Nyla assured him, though she kept her voice low. Once they get his blood sugar stabilized and figure out why his diabetes developed so suddenly, he should recover completely. Because of you, James said. You realize that, don't you? Without your intervention, those doctors would have kept testing and theorizing until it was too late. Through the open door, they could see Dr. Peterson conferring with several colleagues, his earlier arrogance replaced by the focused professionalism of a doctor who finally knew how to help his patient. Dr. Rodriguez caught sight of Nyla and approached the doorway. His blood sugar is responding well to treatment, Miguel reported. We're seeing steady improvement in all his vital signs. Dr. Peterson would like to speak with you. Nyla felt her stomach tighten. Am I in trouble? I don't think so, Miguel smiled. I think he wants to apologize. Nyla followed Miguel into the room, where Dr. Peterson stood beside Richard's bed looking uncomfortable and uncertain. The other doctors had given them space, but she could feel their eyes on her as she approached. Miss Washington, Dr. Peterson began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. You don't need to, Nyla started, but he held up a hand. Yes, I do. I dismissed your observations without proper consideration. I let professional pride cloud my judgment, and that almost cost Mr. Blackwood his life. He paused, looking down at Richard's peaceful face. Your diagnosis was correct. He's suffering from adult-onset type 1 diabetes, likely triggered by extreme stress and overwork. The ketoacidosis was severe, but we caught it in time thanks to you. Thanks to all of us, Nyla corrected gently. I just noticed what others missed. You noticed what we refused to see, Dr. Singh interjected, joining the conversation. We were so focused on finding rare diseases that we overlooked the most common metabolic disorder in the world. Dr. Peterson nodded reluctantly. The irony is that if we had simply followed basic diagnostic protocols instead of trying to impress each other with exotic theories, we would have caught this on day one. What matters is that you caught it now, Nyla said. How is he doing? Much better. His blood sugar is stabilizing, the ketones are clearing from his system, and his other vital signs are returning to normal. He should regain consciousness within the next few hours. As if summoned by their conversation, Richard's eyes fluttered open. He blinked slowly, looking confused and disoriented as he tried to focus on the faces surrounding his bed. Mr. Blackwood? Dr. Peterson said gently. Can you hear me? Do you know where you are? Richard's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Home. I'm home. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the medical equipment and concerned faces. How long? 2 weeks, Dr. Peterson answered. You've been very sick, but you're going to be fine now. Richard tried to sit up, but Dr. Singh gently pressed him back down. Easy, Mr. Blackwood. Your body has been through a lot. You need to rest and let the medication work. 2 weeks. Richard's voice grew stronger, tinged with disbelief. What was wrong with me? Dr. Peterson exchanged glances with his colleagues. You developed type 1 diabetes, likely brought on by stress and overwork. It caused severe complications that we took some time to diagnose properly. Richard's sharp business mind, even weakened by illness, picked up on the hesitation in the doctor's voice. Some time? 2 weeks seems like a long time to diagnose diabetes. The room fell silent. Nyla stepped forward slightly, and Richard's eyes focused on her for the first time. You're new, he said, his voice curious rather than accusatory. I don't remember hiring you. This is Miss Washington, James interjected. She's been working here for 3 weeks. She's actually the one who figured out what was wrong with you. Richard's eyebrows rose with surprise. Really? Nyla felt heat rise in her cheeks as all eyes turned to her again. I just noticed some symptoms that reminded me of my cousin's illness. The doctors did all the real work. What symptoms? Richard asked, his business instincts making him want to understand exactly what had happened. The way your breath smelled, the color of your fingernails, how your skin looked under certain lights, Nyla explained. My grandmother always taught me to trust all my senses when someone was sick, not just what machines could tell you. Richard studied her face with the intensity that had made him one of the most successful businessmen in the world. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was, Nyla said softly. She passed away last year, but she taught me to pay attention to details that others might miss. And these doctors, Richard said, his voice taking on a sharper edge as he looked around the room, they missed what you caught? Dr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Blackwood, we ran every test available, consulted with specialists from around the world. But you didn't listen to the person who was actually observing my symptoms, Richard interrupted. His weakness hadn't diminished his ability to cut straight to the heart of a problem. Sir, with all due respect, Dr. Chin interjected, Miss Washington isn't medically trained. Her guess happened to be correct, but... My guess. Nyla felt a spark of anger. I didn't guess. I observed, I remembered, and I made logical connections based on experience. Richard's eyes sharpened with interest. Tell me about your experience. My cousin had similar symptoms 5 years ago. The emergency room doctors ran tests for weeks while he got sicker. My grandmother finally convinced them to test his blood sugar response to food intake, and they discovered his diabetes. The pattern was almost identical to yours. And you recognized this pattern while 20 specialists missed it? I wasn't looking for complicated diseases, Nyla said simply. I was just watching and listening. Richard was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he looked directly at Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson, I'm grateful for your care, but I have to ask, if Miss Washington hadn't spoken up, what would have happened to me? Dr. Peterson's face went pale. The ketoacidosis was progressing rapidly. Without proper treatment. He didn't finish the sentence. I would have died, Richard said flatly. Possibly, Dr. Peterson admitted quietly. Richard turned back to Nyla, his expression serious but warm. Miss Washington, it seems I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything, Nyla replied. I just did what anyone would do. No, Richard said firmly, you did what someone with courage and wisdom would do. Someone who wasn't afraid to speak up when it mattered. He looked pointedly at the assembled doctors. That's apparently rarer than I thought. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, I want you to know that Miss Washington's observations were invaluable. She kept detailed records of your symptoms, noticed patterns we missed, and insisted on proper testing even when we initially dismissed her concerns. Initially dismissed her concerns, Richard repeated, his voice carrying the tone that had intimidated corporate boardrooms around the world. And why were her concerns dismissed? The silence stretched uncomfortably until Dr. Peterson finally answered. Because we assumed that medical expertise trumped simple observation. We were wrong. You were more than wrong, Richard said, his voice growing stronger with each word. You were arrogant. You let your egos nearly cost me my life. He turned to Nyla again, his expression softening. Miss Washington, I'd like you to stay after the doctors leave. We need to talk. As the medical team began filing out of the room, Dr. Peterson approached Nyla one more time. Miss Washington, I hope you'll accept my sincere apology. Your bravery in speaking up, despite our initial reception, likely saved Mr. Blackwood's life. I hope this experience will make me a better doctor. I hope so too, Nyla replied. For the sake of your future patients. After the doctors left, only Nyla, Richard, and James remained in the room. Richard struggled to sit up more comfortably, and both Nyla and James moved to help him. Thank you, he said once he was settled. Both of you. James, I know you've been worried sick. And Miss Washington. Nyla, if I may, you saved my life when the best doctors in the world couldn't. Anyone would have, Nyla began, but Richard cut her off. No, they wouldn't have. 20 medical experts stood in this room for 2 weeks and saw nothing but failure. You saw a pattern, recognized a solution, and had the courage to speak up despite being dismissed and belittled. That's not something anyone would do. That's something special. Nyla felt tears prick her eyes. I was just trying to help. And you did help. More than you know. Richard paused, studying her face again. Tell me about yourself, Nyla. What's your background? What brought you to work here? Nyla found herself opening up to this man she had only just met but whose life she had helped save. She told him about growing up in Detroit, about her grandmother's wisdom, about working multiple jobs to support herself after her grandmother's death, about taking the position at his mansion because she needed the stability and the salary. You're educated, Richard observed. I can hear it in how you speak, how you think through problems. I have a bachelor's degree in social work, Nyla admitted. But there aren't many jobs in that field that pay enough to live on. So you took a job as a maid. I took a job that pays the bills and gives me time to figure out what comes next, Nyla corrected. Richard smiled for the first time since regaining consciousness. I think I have an idea about what comes next. But first, I need to recover, and you need to think about whether you'd be interested in a different kind of opportunity. What kind of opportunity? The kind that would use your real talents instead of wasting them on cleaning floors, Richard said. The kind that could help other people the way you helped me. Nyla felt her heart skip a beat, but she tried to remain practical. Mr. Blackwood, you just woke up from a serious illness. You don't need to make any big decisions right now. I've been making big decisions my whole life, Richard replied. And one thing I've learned is that when you find someone with genuine wisdom and courage, you don't let them get away. As James quietly excused himself to inform the household staff that Richard was recovering, Nyla found herself alone with her employer for the first time. The man who had seemed so distant and intimidating when she first started working at the mansion now looked at her with genuine gratitude and something that might have been respect. Thank you, he said again, his voice soft but sincere. For caring enough to fight for me when nobody else would. You're welcome, Nyla replied. I'm just glad you're going to be okay. I'm going to be better than okay, Richard said with growing confidence. And if you're willing, I think you are too. The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Dr. Rodriguez entered, carrying a tablet with test results. Mr. Blackwood, I have your latest blood work. Everything is stabilizing beautifully. With proper diabetes management, you should make a complete recovery. And what does proper diabetes management look like? Richard asked. Insulin therapy, dietary changes, regular monitoring, and stress reduction, Miguel replied. The stress reduction part is going to be crucial. Your condition was likely triggered by extreme work pressure and poor self-care. Richard glanced at Nyla. It sounds like I'm going to need someone to help me manage all of that. We can recommend several excellent diabetes educators and nutrition specialists, Miguel offered. I'm sure you can, Richard said, but I think I've found someone who understands more about practical healthcare than all your specialists combined. As the implications of his words sank in, Nyla realized that her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. The maid who had saved a millionaire's life was about to discover that sometimes courage and compassion could open doors she had never even dreamed of walking through. The next morning brought a transformation that seemed almost miraculous. Richard sat up in bed without assistance. His color had returned to normal, and his eyes were clear and focused for the first time in weeks. The medical equipment that had cluttered his room was being systematically removed as his condition stabilized under the simple but effective diabetes treatment protocol. Dr. Peterson stood beside the bed with a tablet full of test results, looking both relieved and slightly embarrassed as he delivered the good news. Your blood glucose has stabilized at normal levels, he reported. Ketone levels are back to baseline, and all your other vital signs are excellent. The insulin therapy is working perfectly. How is this possible? Richard asked, accepting a cup of coffee from James with steady hands. 2 weeks of hell, and now I feel almost normal after 1 day of treatment? Diabetic ketoacidosis responds quickly to proper treatment when caught in time, Dr. Rodriguez explained from his position near the window. Your body was essentially starving for insulin. Once we provided it, your metabolism began functioning normally again. But why did I develop diabetes so suddenly? Richard pressed. I'm 42 years old, in good health, no family history of diabetes. Dr. Singh consulted his notes. Adult-onset type 1 diabetes, while rare, can be triggered by extreme stress. Your work schedule over the past year, the pressure from the merger negotiations, the lack of sleep and poor eating habits. All of these factors can overwhelm the immune system and trigger an autoimmune attack on insulin-producing cells. You're saying my work habits nearly killed me? More accurately, Dr. Chin interjected, your work habits created conditions that triggered a genetic predisposition you didn't know you had. The diabetes was always a possibility, the stress just activated it. Richard absorbed this information with the analytical mind that had built his fortune. So if Miss Washington hadn't recognized the symptoms, I would have died from something completely preventable. The doctors exchanged uncomfortable glances. The truth was undeniable and humbling. The ketoacidosis was progressing rapidly, Dr. Peterson admitted. Without proper diagnosis and treatment, the outcome would likely have been fatal within days. Days? Richard repeated quietly. Then he looked up at the assembled medical team with the sharp focus that made him a formidable businessman. Gentlemen, I want to be clear about something. Miss Washington saved my life, but this experience has also taught me something important about the state of modern medicine. The doctors waited nervously for his assessment. You're all brilliant, accomplished physicians with impressive credentials and expensive equipment. But you almost let me die because you couldn't see past your own assumptions. Miss Washington, with no medical training but keen observation skills and practical wisdom, diagnosed what you missed. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Peterson began, but Richard held up a hand. I'm not finished. This isn't about blame or lawsuits or professional consequences. This is about learning. You failed not because you lacked knowledge but because you forgot the most basic principle of medicine. Listen to the patient, observe the symptoms, and consider simple explanations before complex ones. Dr. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right. We got caught up in the prestige of finding a rare disease instead of focusing on what would actually help you. Exactly. And Miss Washington succeeded because she approached the problem with fresh eyes and practical experience, unclouded by preconceptions or professional ego. A soft knock interrupted the conversation. Nyla entered carrying a breakfast tray, having resumed some of her regular duties now that the crisis had passed. I brought your breakfast, Mr. Blackwood, she said quietly. Dr. Rodriguez helped me plan meals that will work with your new dietary requirements. Richard smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in weeks. Thank you, Nyla. That's very thoughtful. As she set down the tray, Richard noticed the careful attention she had paid to the details: diabetic-friendly foods beautifully presented, proper portion sizes, even a small card with nutritional information written in her neat handwriting. You researched diabetes management, he observed. I wanted to make sure I was helping, not making things worse, Nyla replied. I found some excellent resources online about nutrition for type 1 diabetes. Dr. Peterson looked at the meal plan with professional interest. This is actually excellent. Better than many of the plans our nutritionists create. Common sense and caring attention, Richard said, looking at Nyla with growing admiration. Revolutionary concepts, apparently. As the doctors continued their morning rounds and consultations, Richard asked Nyla to stay behind again. When they were alone, he set his coffee cup aside and looked at her seriously. I meant what I said yesterday about a different kind of opportunity, he began. I've been thinking about it all night and I have a proposal for you. Nyla felt her heart rate increase. What kind of proposal? I want you to work with me on something important. Something that could help other people the way you helped me. I'm not sure I understand. Richard leaned forward slightly, his eyes bright with the enthusiasm that had driven his business success. I'm starting a foundation focused on practical healthcare education and advocacy. Too many people fall through the cracks of our medical system because doctors are trained to look for complex problems instead of simple solutions. That sounds wonderful, but what would I do? I don't have medical training or foundation experience. You have something more valuable than either of those, Richard said firmly. You have wisdom, compassion, and the ability to see what others miss. You understand that healthcare isn't just about technology and expertise, it's about paying attention to people. Nyla sat down in the chair beside his bed, overwhelmed by the possibilities he was suggesting. Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the offer, but... Richard, he interrupted. Call me Richard. And before you say you're not qualified, let me tell you what I see when I look at you. He paused, organizing his thoughts with the precision that had made him successful. I see someone who noticed symptoms that 20 specialists missed. Someone who had the courage to speak up despite being dismissed and belittled. Someone who researched diabetes management overnight to make sure my breakfast would be healthy. Someone who cares more about helping people than protecting her own ego. But I don't know anything about running a foundation or managing programs. Neither did I when I started my first company, Richard said with a smile. But I learned, and so can you. The technical skills can be taught. The wisdom and compassion you already have can't be. Nyla was quiet for a moment, thinking about the offer. It seemed too good to be true, too big a leap from cleaning floors to working on healthcare initiatives. What exactly would this foundation do? She asked. Richard's eyes lit up. We'd start by training healthcare workers to value simple observations alongside complex diagnostics. We'd create programs to help patients advocate for themselves when doctors aren't listening. We'd fund research into why basic conditions get missed and how to prevent it. And you think I could contribute to that? I think you could lead parts of it, Richard said seriously. Your experience with my case could be the foundation for training programs. Who better to teach doctors about the value of observation than someone who saved a life through careful observation? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Nyla had spent her life in service jobs, supporting herself while figuring out what she really wanted to do. The possibility of meaningful work that could help people on a larger scale was something she had never dared to imagine. "I would need to learn so much," she said slowly. "We'd learn together," Richard assured her. "I'd be working on this too, not just funding it. After what I've been through, I realize I want to do something more meaningful than just making money." James appeared in the doorway with another visitor, Dr. Rodriguez, who looked excited about something. "Mr. Blackwood, I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to share something with you and Miss Washington." "What is it, Miguel?" "I've been talking with some colleagues about your case, and there's significant interest in documenting what happened here. Not for publicity but for medical education. Miss Washington's diagnostic approach could be the basis for training programs at medical schools." Richard looked at Nyla. "See? I told you your experience could help others." "Medical schools want to learn from me?" Nyla asked, incredulous. "They want to learn from what you accomplished," Miguel clarified. "Your systematic observation, your logical reasoning, your willingness to challenge expert opinion. These are skills we need to teach future doctors. Would you be interested in something like that?" Richard asked. "Working with medical schools to develop training programs?" Nyla felt overwhelmed by the possibilities being presented to her. A few days ago, she had been a maid worried about losing her job. Now she was being offered opportunities that could change not just her life, but potentially help countless other people. "I need time to think about all of this," she said honestly. "Of course," Richard said. "But while you're thinking, consider this. You saved my life because you weren't afraid to trust your instincts and speak up for what you believed was right. The foundation would be about encouraging that same courage and wisdom in others. And you'd be working alongside people who value your contributions," Miguel added. "People who understand that medical expertise comes in many forms." As the conversation continued, Nyla realized that her decision to speak up about Richard's symptoms had been about more than just saving one man's life. It had been the first step toward discovering that her own life could be about more than just getting by. The simple observation that had saved Richard Blackwood was about to transform her own future in ways she was only beginning to understand. 3 days later, Richard was strong enough to leave his bedroom and join the household in the main living areas for the first time in weeks. The mansion, which had felt like a hospital for so long, began to return to its normal rhythm as the medical equipment was removed and the army of specialists departed. Nyla was in the kitchen helping prepare lunch when James found her, his face bright with an unusual excitement. "Miss Washington, Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his study," he announced. "He has something important to discuss with you. Is everything all right? His blood sugar levels haven't." "Oh no, nothing like that," James assured her quickly. "His health is excellent. This is about something else entirely. Something good, I believe." Nyla made her way to Richard's study, a magnificent room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. Richard stood by the window overlooking the estate gardens, looking more like his old self than he had since she'd started working there. "Nyla, thank you for coming," he said, turning to greet her with a warm smile. "Please sit down. We have several things to discuss." She took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, noting that he looked stronger and more energetic than she had ever seen him. "First," Richard began, settling into his own chair, "I want to give you this." He slid an envelope across the desk toward her. Nyla opened it to find a check that made her gasp out loud. "Mr. Blackwood. Richard, this is..." She stared at the amount, which was more money than she had ever seen in one place. "This is too much. I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Richard said firmly but kindly. "That's a bonus for saving my life. It's not payment for services, it's gratitude for courage. But I was just doing what anyone would." "Stop saying that," Richard interrupted gently. "We both know that's not true. 20 world-renowned doctors couldn't do what you did. You observed, you analyzed, you acted with wisdom and bravery. That deserves recognition." Nyla looked at the check again, her hands trembling slightly. The amount would change her life completely, pay off her student loans, give her security she had never known, provide options she had never dared to consider. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "This is incredibly generous." "It's the least I could do," Richard replied. "But it's not the only thing I want to discuss with you." He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "I've spent the last 3 days thinking about our conversation regarding the foundation. I've also been talking with Dr. Rodriguez and several other medical professionals about what happened here. The response has been overwhelming." "What kind of response?" "Universities want to study your diagnostic approach. Medical journals want to publish case studies. Healthcare organizations want to invite you to speak at conferences. Richard paused, watching her reaction. Nyla, you've become something of a sensation in medical circles. That's ridiculous, Nyla protested. I'm not a medical professional. I just noticed things that trained professionals missed, Richard finished. And that's exactly why people want to hear from you. You represent something that modern medicine has lost. The art of careful observation and practical wisdom. Nyla felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was describing. I don't know how to speak at medical conferences. I wouldn't know what to say. You tell your story. You'd explain how you recognized the symptoms, what made you think of diabetes, why you persisted despite being dismissed. You teach doctors to value the kind of thinking that saved my life. And you think people would listen to me? I know they will, Richard said confidently. Dr. Rodriguez has already arranged for you to speak at Johns Hopkins next month, if you're interested. Harvard Medical School wants to develop a case study around your observations. 3 different medical journals have requested interviews. The scope of the opportunities left Nyla speechless. A month ago, she had been cleaning houses and wondering how she would pay her bills. Now she was being offered a platform to influence medical education at the highest levels. There's something else, Richard continued. I've been finalizing the structure for the healthcare foundation we discussed. I'd like you to be the co-director. Co-director? Nyla's voice came out as a squeak. Equal partnership, Richard confirmed. Your insights and experience guiding the mission, my business knowledge and resources supporting the implementation. We'd work together to create programs that bridge the gap between high-tech medicine and practical patient care. Nyla stood up and walked to the window, needing a moment to process what was being offered to her. The gardens outside were perfectly manicured, a symbol of the wealth and privilege that had surrounded Richard all his life. Yet he was offering to share his resources with someone who had grown up with nothing, simply because she had cared enough to save his life. Why me? She asked without turning around. You could partner with established medical professionals, people with credentials and experience. Because they're part of the problem, Richard said simply. They're so embedded in the current system that they can't see its flaws. You can see them clearly because you're outside the system. You're not blinded by training or tradition or professional pride. But I have so much to learn about healthcare policy, foundation management, medical education. And I have so much to learn about practical patient care, observation skills and maintaining perspective, Richard countered. We'd complement each other perfectly. Nyla turned back to face him, seeing the sincerity in his expression. You really believe we could make a difference? I know we could, Richard said with conviction. What happened in this house over the past 2 weeks proves that there's something fundamentally wrong with how medicine is practiced. Brilliant doctors missed an obvious diagnosis because they were looking in the wrong direction. That pattern repeats itself every day in hospitals and clinics around the world. And you think we could change that? I think we could start changing it. One training program at a time, one medical school at a time, one doctor at a time. The magnitude of the vision he was describing was both inspiring and daunting. Nyla had always wanted to help people, but she had never imagined having the opportunity to help them on such a scale. What would happen to my job here? She asked practically. Richard smiled. You'd be trading cleaning floors for potentially cleaning up healthcare education. I think it's a fair upgrade. And if I fail? If I'm not good at this kind of work? Then we learn from the experience and try something different, Richard said calmly. But I don't think you'll fail. I think you'll excel, just like you excelled at diagnosing what 20 specialists couldn't. Nyla sat back down, her mind racing through the possibilities and challenges. The offer was beyond anything she had ever dreamed of, but it also represented a complete transformation of her life. I need to ask you something, she said slowly. Is this offer about gratitude for saving your life, or do you genuinely believe I can contribute to this foundation? Richard leaned back in his chair, considering the question seriously. It started with gratitude, he admitted. But gratitude alone wouldn't make me offer you a partnership in a multi-million-dollar foundation. This offer is about what I observed about you during the crisis. What did you observe? Intelligence, wisdom, courage, compassion, and the ability to think clearly under pressure. You didn't just save my life. You handled the entire situation with remarkable grace and competence. Those are the qualities that make great leaders. I don't think of myself as a leader. Neither do most great leaders at first, Richard said with a smile. Leadership isn't about thinking you're better than others. It's about caring enough to take responsibility when something important is at stake. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. James entered with a cordless phone. "Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Rodriguez is calling from Johns Hopkins. He says it's about the speaking engagement for Miss Washington." Richard looked at Nyla. "Do you want to hear what he has to say?" Nyla took a deep breath. This felt like a moment of decision, a point where her life could go in completely different directions depending on what she chose. "Yes," she said finally. "I want to hear what he has to say." Richard put the call on speakerphone, and Miguel's excited voice filled the study. "Richard, Nyla, I hope you're both there because I have incredible news." The response to Nyla's story has been overwhelming. "We've had requests from medical schools across the country. The American Medical Association wants to discuss incorporating her observations into continuing education requirements." "That's wonderful, Miguel," Richard replied. "What does this mean practically?" "It means Nyla could have a significant impact on how medicine is taught and practiced. Her approach could become a standard part of medical education." Nyla felt her heart racing as the reality of the opportunity sank in. "Dr. Rodriguez, do you really think what I did was that important?" "Nyla, what you did represents a fundamental shift in how we think about diagnosis and patient care. You proved that careful observation and practical wisdom can be more valuable than expensive technology and complex theories. That's a lesson the entire medical profession needs to learn." After the call ended, Richard and Nyla sat in thoughtful silence for a moment. "So," Richard said finally, "what do you think? Ready to help revolutionize healthcare?" Nyla looked at the check still sitting on the desk, then at Richard's hopeful expression, then out the window at the beautiful estate where her life had changed so dramatically. "I think," she said slowly, "that my grandmother would tell me to stop overthinking and start helping." Richard's face broke into a broad grin. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," Nyla confirmed, feeling a surge of excitement and determination. "Let's build this foundation and see how many lives we can save." As they shook hands on their partnership, Nyla realized that saving Richard Blackwood's life had been just the beginning. Together they were about to embark on something that could save countless others. 6 months later, the Blackwood Washington Healthcare Foundation occupied an entire floor of a gleaming office building in downtown Chicago. Nyla stood in her corner office, looking out at the city skyline while reviewing applications for their first round of medical school partnerships. The transformation in her life still felt surreal at times. The scared maid who had once worried about speaking up to doctors was now scheduled to deliver the keynote address at the International Conference on Patient Care Innovation next month. "Working late again?" Richard's voice came from her doorway. Nyla turned to see him leaning against the frame, wearing the casual blazer and jeans that had become his standard work attire since leaving the high-pressure world of tech. Their foundation work had changed him as much as it had changed her. He seemed more relaxed, more purposeful, more genuinely happy than she had ever seen him. "Just reviewing these applications from medical schools," she replied, gesturing to the stack of documents on her desk. 12 universities want to pilot our observation-based diagnostic training program. It's incredible." "It's well-deserved," Richard said, entering the office and settling into one of the chairs across from her desk. "Your presentation at Harvard last month was brilliant." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Nyla felt heat rise in her cheeks. Even after months of speaking engagements and media interviews, she still struggled to accept praise for what she considered simply sharing common sense. "The real success is in the results," she said, changing the subject. "The preliminary data from our pilot programs shows a 15% improvement in diagnostic accuracy when doctors use our observation protocols." 15%, Richard repeated with satisfaction. "That translates to thousands of lives potentially saved each year." Their foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations. What had started as an idea born from one medical emergency had become a movement that was reshaping how healthcare professionals approached patient care. "Speaking of results," Richard continued, "I have some news that might interest you." "Good news, I hope?" "The best kind. Dr. Peterson called today." Nyla raised an eyebrow. The lead physician who had initially dismissed her observations had since become one of their strongest advocates, implementing their training programs at his own hospital system. "He wanted to report on the first 6 months of implementing our protocols at Presbyterian Medical Center," Richard continued. "They've seen a 22% reduction in diagnostic errors and a 30% improvement in patient satisfaction scores." "That's amazing," Nyla said, genuinely pleased. "I'm proud of how much Dr. Peterson has embraced the changes." "He also said something else that I thought you'd want to hear. He said working with our foundation has made him a better doctor and a better person." He credited you with teaching him to listen with humility instead of hearing with arrogance. Nyla felt tears prick her eyes. The validation from medical professionals who had initially dismissed her meant more than any amount of media attention or speaking fees. It's not just about me, she said quietly. It's about creating a culture where everyone's observations matter, where wisdom is valued regardless of its source. Which brings me to something I've been wanting to discuss with you, Richard said, his tone becoming more serious. What is it? Richard stood up and began pacing slightly, the way he did when he was working through important decisions. Nyla, we've been working together for 6 months now, and it's been the most rewarding time of my life. Not just professionally but personally. Nyla watched him carefully, sensing something important in his tone. I feel the same way. This work has given me purpose I never knew I was looking for. That's just it, Richard said, stopping his pacing to look directly at her. It's not just the work anymore. At least not for me. The office suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic, but inside, Nyla could hear her own heartbeat. What do you mean? She asked softly. Richard moved closer to her desk, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. I mean that somewhere between life and death conversations and building this foundation together, I've fallen in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge Nyla wasn't sure she was ready to cross. She had felt the growing connection between them over the months, the way their partnership had deepened beyond professional collaboration into something more personal and meaningful. Richard, she began, but he held up a gentle hand. I know this complicates things, he said quickly. I know we're partners in this foundation, and I know there's a significant difference in our backgrounds and circumstances. I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. Nyla stood up, moving around the desk to face him more directly. You think I'd feel pressured? I think you might feel like your position here depends on your personal response to me, which it absolutely doesn't, Richard said earnestly. This foundation is yours as much as mine, regardless of anything else. And you think our different backgrounds matter? Richard looked uncertain. Don't they? I grew up with every privilege imaginable. You've had to fight for everything you've achieved. I don't want to be another wealthy man who assumes. Richard, Nyla interrupted, stepping closer to him. Do you remember what you said to me when you offered me this partnership? I said a lot of things. You said that wisdom and compassion couldn't be taught, but that I already had both. You said that my experience and perspective were exactly what this foundation needed. I meant every word of that. Then why would you think our different backgrounds are a problem instead of a strength? Nyla asked gently. We've proven that our different perspectives make us better partners professionally. Why wouldn't that be true personally? Richard's face brightened with hope. Does that mean? It means that I've been falling in love with you too, Nyla said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. I've been trying to convince myself it was just gratitude or admiration or professional respect, but it's more than that. How much more? Richard asked, taking another step closer. Much more, Nyla whispered. You see me not as someone to be grateful to or someone to be protected, but as an equal partner in something meaningful. You value my mind and my heart equally. That's not something I've ever experienced before. Richard reached out to take her hands in his. You saved my life, Nyla. Not just from the diabetes, but from a life that was all about accumulating wealth and power without any real purpose. You showed me what it means to use what I have to actually help people. And you gave me a platform to use everything my grandmother taught me to make a real difference in the world, Nyla replied. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. They stood close together in the quiet office, the weight and wonder of their mutual confession settling between them. So what happens now? Richard asked. Now we figure out how to balance a professional partnership with a personal relationship, Nyla said practically. It won't be simple. The best things never are, Richard replied. But I think if we can revolutionize healthcare education together, we can probably figure out how to date each other. Nyla laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Date each other? Is that what we're calling this? What would you call it? The beginning of something beautiful, she said simply. Richard leaned down to kiss her forehead gently. I love your optimism. I love your courage, Nyla replied. It takes courage to tell someone you love them when you're not sure they feel the same way. I had a good teacher when it comes to courage, Richard said with a smile. Someone once taught me that sometimes you have to speak up for what you believe in, even when experts are telling you you're wrong. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. James appeared, looking slightly embarrassed. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, But Dr. Rodriguez is here with some urgent news about the Johns Hopkins expansion. Send him in, Richard said, though he didn't step away from Nyla. Miguel entered the office, his face bright with excitement, then stopped short when he noticed their proximity and the emotional atmosphere in the room. "Oh," he said, looking back and forth between them. "Should I come back later?" "No, it's fine," Nyla assured him, though she felt her cheeks warming. "What's the news about Johns Hopkins?" Miguel grinned. "They want to establish the Nyla Washington Center for Diagnostic Excellence. Full funding, dedicated faculty, and integration into their core curriculum." "They want to name a center after me?" Nyla asked, incredulous. "The proposal specifically mentions your revolutionary approach to patient observation and diagnostic humility," Miguel continued. "They're calling it a paradigm shift in medical education." Richard squeezed Nyla's hand. "How does it feel to have a medical center named after you?" "Overwhelming," Nyla admitted. "And wonderful. And terrifying." "That sounds about right for someone who's changing the world," Richard said proudly. As Miguel briefed them on the details of the Johns Hopkins proposal, Nyla found herself marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago she had been cleaning floors and struggling to pay bills. Now she was co-directing a foundation that was transforming medical education, had medical centers being named in her honor, and had found love with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. "There's one more thing," Miguel said as he prepared to leave. "The American Medical Association wants to present you with their Humanitarian Award at next year's annual conference. It's their highest honor for contributions to patient care." After Miguel left, Richard and Nyla stood together in the quiet office, processing the magnitude of what was happening around them. "A year ago, I was dying in my bedroom while 20 doctors stood around helplessly," Richard said thoughtfully. "Now we're changing how doctors are trained all over the country." "A year ago, I was afraid to speak up to those same doctors," Nyla added. "Now medical schools are naming centers after me." "We've come a long way," Richard observed. "We have," Nyla agreed. "But I think the best is still ahead of us." "Professional or personal?" "Both," Nyla said with a smile. "Definitely both." As they gathered their things to leave the office together, Nyla reflected on how love had found them in the most unexpected place. Not in the drama of a medical emergency, but in the quiet satisfaction of working together toward something meaningful. It wasn't the kind of love story she had ever imagined for herself, but it was the kind that felt real and lasting and built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. And that, she thought, was the best kind of love story of all. 1 year after their professional partnership began, Nyla and Richard's personal relationship had grown as steadily and purposefully as their foundation. They had learned to navigate the delicate balance between their roles as co-directors and their feelings for each other, always maintaining professionalism during business hours while allowing their connection to deepen in private moments. The foundation had established partnerships with 43 medical schools across the country, and their diagnostic training protocols were being implemented in over 200 hospitals. More importantly, they were seeing real results. Diagnostic accuracy was improving, patient satisfaction was rising, and medical professionals were reporting greater job satisfaction as they rediscovered the art of careful observation. Nyla stood in the conference room of their expanded offices, reviewing presentations for their upcoming board meeting. The foundation now employed 37 people, including doctors, educators, researchers, and administrators who shared their vision of more compassionate and observant healthcare. "The quarterly numbers look incredible," Richard said, entering the room with coffee for both of them. It had become their morning ritual, reviewing reports together over coffee before the day's meetings began. "Look at this," Nyla said, pointing to a chart on her laptop screen. "Hospital systems using our protocols are reporting a 38% reduction in misdiagnoses. That's thousands of patients getting correct treatment faster." Richard set down her coffee and leaned over her shoulder to look at the data, his proximity still causing her heart to skip a beat even after months of being together. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said softly, pressing a quick kiss to the top of her head. "She'd probably say we're making too big a deal of common sense," Nyla replied with a smile. "But yes, I think she'd be proud." Their relationship had grown naturally from their shared work, built on mutual respect and common purpose. They challenged each other intellectually, supported each other emotionally, and found joy in both their professional successes and quiet personal moments. "Speaking of your grandmother," Richard said, settling into the chair beside her, "I've been thinking about the community clinic proposal. One of their newest initiatives was funding free clinics in underserved communities, places where careful observation and practical wisdom were often more valuable than expensive technology. The Detroit location would be perfect, Nyla agreed. Right in the neighborhood where I grew up. We could serve families who can't afford regular healthcare while training medical students in community-based observation skills. I was thinking we could call it the Dorothy Washington Community Health Center, Richard suggested. After your grandmother. Nyla felt tears spring to her eyes. You want to name a clinic after my grandmother? I want to honor the woman who taught you the wisdom that saved my life and launched this entire foundation, Richard said simply. Her insights about healthcare observation deserve to be remembered and celebrated. That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever suggested, Nyla whispered, reaching for his hand. Their tender moment was interrupted by their assistant announcing that Dr. Peterson had arrived for their monthly partnership review. The relationship with the physician who had initially dismissed Nyla's observations had become one of their strongest professional alliances. Richard, Nyla, wonderful to see you both, Dr. Peterson said warmly as he entered the conference room. I have remarkable news from Presbyterian Medical Center. Tell us everything, Nyla said, gesturing for him to take a seat. We've been implementing your protocols for 8 months now, and the results exceed our most optimistic projections. But more importantly, the culture change has been dramatic. What kind of culture change? Richard asked. Our residents are spending more time with patients, asking better questions and making more accurate initial assessments. Our nurses report feeling more valued because their observations are being taken seriously. Even our janitorial staff has been trained to notice and report changes in patient condition. Everyone's observations matter, Nyla said with satisfaction. That was always the goal. But here's the most significant change, Dr. Peterson continued. Our medical error rates have dropped 43%, and our patient satisfaction scores are the highest in the hospital's history. The numbers were impressive, but Nyla was more interested in the human impact. What do the doctors say about the changes? That's the beautiful part, Dr. Peterson replied. They report feeling more confident in their diagnoses, more connected to their patients and more satisfied with their work. Your protocols aren't just improving patient care, they're improving physician well-being. Richard and Nyla exchanged meaningful glances. This was exactly what they had hoped to achieve. Not just better medical outcomes, but a more fulfilling practice of medicine. Dr. Peterson, Richard said, how would you feel about expanding this partnership? We're considering a national pilot program with 10 major hospital systems. I'd be honored to help coordinate it, Dr. Peterson replied immediately. This approach needs to spread as widely as possible. After Dr. Peterson left, Richard and Nyla worked together on refining their expansion plans. They had developed an easy rhythm of collaboration, building on each other's ideas and compensating for each other's weaknesses. You know what I love about working with you? Richard said as they reviewed budget projections. My brilliant insights and sparkling personality? Nyla teased. Well, yes, those too, Richard laughed. But I love how you keep me grounded in what really matters. When I start thinking about growth and expansion and impact metrics, you remind me that it's all about individual patients getting better care. And I love how you help me see the bigger picture, Nyla replied. When I get focused on one patient or one story, you help me understand how we can scale our impact to help thousands of people. Their partnership, both professional and personal, had become a perfect example of how different backgrounds and perspectives could create something stronger than either could achieve alone. I have something I want to ask you, Richard said, his tone becoming more serious. What is it? The board has been discussing our 5-year strategic plan, and they want to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation. Nyla looked up from her laptop, startled. CEO? What about you? I become chairman of the board, focusing on funding and strategic partnerships while you handle day-to-day operations. The board feels and I agree that you're the visionary leader this foundation needs. Richard, I can't take your position. You're not taking anything, he interrupted gently. You're accepting the role you've already been performing. You're the one medical professionals want to hear from. You're the one who developed our core protocols. You're the one who understands the mission at its deepest level. Nyla stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city below. The offer was both thrilling and terrifying, recognition of how far she had come, but also an enormous responsibility. What if I'm not ready? She asked. What if you are? Richard countered, joining her at the window. You've been ready for everything else this foundation has thrown at you. You've spoken at medical conferences, developed training curricula, managed complex partnerships, and inspired healthcare workers across the country. But CEO of a multi-million-dollar foundation is just a title, Richard said firmly. You're already doing the job. We're just asking you to accept the recognition and compensation that goes with it. Nyla turned to face him, seeing the confidence and love in his expression. You really think I can do this? I know you can do this, Richard said without hesitation. The same wisdom and courage that saved my life will serve this foundation and everyone it helps. And you're sure this isn't about our personal relationship? The board isn't promoting me because I'm dating the founder? Richard smiled. The board is promoting you despite our personal relationship, not because of it. Some of them actually worried that dating me might hurt your credibility. But your work speaks for itself. Nyla took a deep breath, thinking about the scared maid who had been afraid to speak up to doctors just over a year ago. That woman could never have imagined becoming the CEO of a healthcare foundation that was changing medical education across the country. My grandmother always said that when opportunity knocks, you should answer the door with gratitude, not fear, she said finally. Is that a yes? Richard asked hopefully. That's a yes, Nyla confirmed, feeling a surge of excitement and determination. Let's change healthcare together. Richard pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the conference room as they both laughed with joy and anticipation. CEO Nyla Washington, he said as he set her down. I like the sound of that. I like the sound of it too, Nyla admitted. Though I'll probably still feel like an imposter for a while. Imposter syndrome is normal for people doing extraordinary things, Richard assured her. But you're not an imposter. You're a leader who earned her position through wisdom, courage, and results. As they began planning for Nyla's transition to CEO, she reflected on how much their partnership had grown and deepened. What had started as gratitude and professional collaboration had become something richer and more meaningful. A true meeting of minds and hearts, built on shared values and mutual respect. They were building something together that was bigger than either of them could have created alone. And they were building it with love. 6 months into Nyla's tenure as CEO, the foundation had expanded beyond their wildest dreams. They now had international partnerships, a research division that was publishing groundbreaking studies on diagnostic education, and a waiting list of medical schools wanting to implement their programs. But on this particular Friday evening, all of that felt secondary to the quiet dinner Richard had prepared for them at his mansion. The same house where Nyla had first worked as a maid was now a place where she spent most weekends, where they planned both foundation strategies and personal adventures. This is delicious, Nyla said, savoring the carefully prepared meal Richard had made himself. When did you become such a good cook? When I realized that cooking for someone you love is one of life's great pleasures, Richard replied, his eyes warm with affection. Besides, I had to do something to impress the woman who saved my life and then revolutionized healthcare education. I'm pretty sure I'm already impressed, Nyla laughed. You've been impressing me for over a year now. They had settled into a comfortable rhythm of spending weekdays focused on foundation work and weekends enjoying each other's company away from the demands of their public roles. Richard had been teaching Nyla to sail his yacht, while she had been teaching him to appreciate the simple pleasures she had learned from her grandmother, gardening, cooking from scratch, finding joy in everyday moments. I have something I want to show you, Richard said as they finished dinner. He led her to his study, the same room where they had first discussed the foundation partnership. But tonight, the space had been transformed with candles and flowers, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and celebration. What's all this? Nyla asked, though her heart was already racing with anticipation. This is where everything began, Richard said, taking her hands in his. This is where you first agreed to be my partner in changing healthcare. It's where we first talked about building something meaningful together. I remember, Nyla said softly. I was so nervous but so excited about the possibilities. I was nervous too, Richard admitted. I was asking someone I barely knew to trust me with her future, to believe in a vision that existed only in my imagination. It wasn't just imagination, Nyla corrected. It was hope. Hope that we could make things better for people like you, who almost died because the medical system failed them. Richard smiled at her characteristic focus on helping others, even in such a personal moment. Nyla, this year has been the most meaningful of my life. Not just because of what we've accomplished professionally, but because of what we've discovered together personally. What have we discovered? She asked, though she thought she knew what he was going to say. We've discovered that the best partnerships aren't just about complementary skills or shared goals, Richard said, his voice growing more emotional. They're about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself, someone who challenges you to grow while accepting you exactly as you are. Richard. Nyla began, but he gently squeezed her hands. I've discovered that love isn't just about passion or romance, though we have both of those, he continued. It's about respect and admiration and the deep satisfaction of building something beautiful together. He released her hands and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made Nyla's breath catch in her throat. I've discovered that I want to spend the rest of my life being your partner in every way possible, Richard said, dropping to one knee in the same spot where he had first offered her the foundation partnership. Oh my God, Nyla whispered, tears immediately springing to her eyes. Nyla Washington, Richard said, opening the box to reveal a stunning but elegant ring. Will you marry me? The ring was perfect, sophisticated but not ostentatious, beautiful but not flashy. It reflected his understanding of who she was and what she valued. Richard, Nyla found herself overwhelmed by emotion, thinking about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. I know this might seem fast, Richard said, interpreting her hesitation. We've only been together romantically for about a year. But it feels like I've known you my whole life. It feels like everything before meeting you was just preparation for this partnership. It doesn't feel fast, Nyla said through her tears. It feels exactly right. It feels like the natural next step in everything we've been building together. Is that a yes? Richard asked hopefully. That's absolutely a yes, Nyla said, laughing through her tears as Richard slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to be your partner in everything. Yes to all of it. Richard stood up and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the study just as he had done in their office when she accepted the CEO position. I love you, he said as he set her down, his forehead resting against hers. I love your wisdom, your courage, your compassion, your ability to see what others miss. I love how you make me want to use my resources to help people instead of just accumulating more wealth. I love you too, Nyla replied, her hands cupping his face. I love how you saw potential in me that I didn't even know I had. I love how you trusted me with your vision and then encouraged me to make it my own. I love how you make me feel like an equal partner in everything we do. They kissed then, a kiss full of love and promise and excitement about the future they would build together. When should we get married? Richard asked when they finally broke apart. Soon, Nyla said without hesitation. I don't want a long engagement. I want to start this next chapter of our lives together. How soon is soon? Nyla thought about their busy schedules, their foundation responsibilities, and the media attention their engagement would undoubtedly generate. 6 months, she suggested. That gives us time to plan something beautiful but not so much time that we get overwhelmed by the details. 6 months sounds perfect, Richard agreed. Though I'd marry you tomorrow if you wanted. Let's give our families and friends time to celebrate with us, Nyla laughed. And let's give the foundation board time to adjust to having a married CEO and chairman. The board will be thrilled, Richard assured her. They've been watching our partnership evolve and seeing how much stronger we are together than apart. As they settled onto the couch in the study, Nyla admiring her engagement ring while Richard held her close, she reflected on the extraordinary path that had led them here. Do you ever think about how different things would be if I hadn't spoken up about your diabetes? She asked. All the time, Richard replied. I probably would have died in that bedroom, surrounded by brilliant doctors who couldn't save me. And I'd still be cleaning houses, wondering if I'd ever find meaningful work. Instead we found each other, Richard said. We found love, purpose, and a way to help thousands of people. My grandmother always said that everything happens for a reason, Nyla mused. That sometimes what looks like a crisis is actually an opportunity in disguise. Your grandmother was a very wise woman, Richard said. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you, Nyla assured him. She would have seen through all the wealth and success to the good man underneath. She would have appreciated how you've used your resources to help others. Do you think she would have approved of our relationship? Nyla smiled, thinking about her grandmother's practical wisdom and generous heart. She would have said that love built on mutual respect and shared purpose is the strongest foundation for marriage. She would have told us to be grateful for finding each other and to use our partnership to help as many people as possible. Then that's exactly what we'll do, Richard said, kissing the top of her head. We'll build a marriage as strong and purposeful as our professional partnership. As they began planning their future together, Nyla felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. From maid to CEO, from stranger to fiancé, from observer to leader, every step had led her to this perfect place where love and purpose intertwined. She had saved Richard's life by speaking up with courage and wisdom. Now they would spend the rest of their lives saving others through the foundation they had built together and the love they would continue to nurture and share. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, with spring flowers blooming throughout the gardens of the Blackwood estate. Nyla had chosen to hold the ceremony at the mansion where their story began, transforming the elegant grounds into a celebration of love, hope, and new beginnings. She stood in the bridal suite, the same guest room where she had once stayed as a worried employee, looking at herself in the full-length mirror. Her wedding dress was elegant but not extravagant, reflecting her values and personality. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the uncertain maid who had first walked through these halls just 2 years earlier. "You look absolutely radiant," said Dr. Rodriguez, who had become one of her closest friends and was serving as an honorary groomsman. "Richard is the luckiest man alive." "I think I'm the lucky one," Nyla replied, smoothing her dress nervously. 2 years ago I was cleaning these rooms. Today I'm getting married in them." 2 years ago, you saved a man's life and launched a healthcare revolution, Miguel corrected. "Today you're celebrating how far you've both come." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. James entered, looking distinguished in his formal suit and carrying a small wrapped package. "Miss Nyla," he said with the warmth that had made him like family over the past 2 years, "you look beautiful. Mr. Blackwood is a very fortunate man." "Thank you, James. For everything. You've been such a support through all of this." "I have something for you," James said, offering her the package. "It's from Mr. Blackwood, with instructions to give it to you right before the ceremony." Nyla opened the package to find a delicate necklace with a small pendant, a simple compass. The accompanying note, written in Richard's familiar handwriting, made her eyes fill with tears. "For the woman who showed me true direction when I was lost. Your wisdom has been my compass for 2 years, and I hope it will guide us together for the next 50. I love you. R. Help me put it on?" she asked James, her voice thick with emotion. As James fastened the necklace, Nyla thought about the symbolism of the compass. She had indeed helped Richard find direction when his life was threatened, but he had done the same for her, showing her a path to meaningful work and deep love that she had never imagined possible. "It's time," Miguel announced, checking his watch. The ceremony was held in the mansion's main garden, the same space where Nyla had once watched from the kitchen window as Richard conducted business calls. Now 200 guests, including medical professionals, foundation board members, friends, and family, filled elegant white chairs arranged around a flower-covered arch. Nyla walked down the aisle alone, having chosen to honor her grandmother's memory by carrying a small bouquet of Dorothy's favorite flowers rather than being given away by a father figure. She was no one's to give away, she was her own woman, choosing love and partnership freely. Richard stood at the altar looking handsome and nervous, his eyes fixed on her with such love and admiration that she felt her heart skip several beats. Beside him stood Dr. Peterson as his best man, a choice that symbolized how much both men had grown and changed through their shared experiences. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today to celebrate not just the union of Richard and Nyla, but the beautiful partnership they have already built together in service to others." The ceremony was personal and meaningful, with vows they had written themselves that reflected their unique journey and shared commitment to helping others. "Nyla," Richard said when it was his turn to speak, "you saved my life in more ways than I can count. You showed me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the lives we touch and the good we do. You taught me that wisdom comes from caring enough to pay attention, and that courage means speaking up even when others doubt you." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I promise to be your partner in every sense. In marriage, in our foundation work, in building a life that honors the values your grandmother taught you. I promise to listen to your wisdom, support your dreams, and work alongside you to help as many people as possible." When it was Nyla's turn, she looked into Richard's eyes and spoke from her heart. "Richard, when I first met you, you were a successful man who had forgotten what success really meant. Together, we've learned that true success is measured by how much we help others grow and heal. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and you gave me a platform to use gifts I didn't even know I had." She paused, her voice growing emotional. "I promise to be your partner in building something bigger than either of us could create alone. I promise to keep you grounded in what really matters, while you help me see the bigger picture. I promise to love you not just for who you are, but for who we become together." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was witnessed by everyone whose life they had touched through their foundation work. The applause was thunderous, filled with genuine joy and celebration. The reception was held in the mansion's main ballroom, where Nyla had once served at elegant parties as temporary help. Now she was the guest of honor at her own celebration, surrounded by people who had become family through their shared commitment to changing healthcare. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Peterson said during his best man speech, "2 years ago, I was the arrogant physician who almost let a patient die because I refused to listen to a maid's observations. Today, I'm honored to stand as best man for that same patient and to call that maid one of my dearest friends and most respected colleagues." He paused as the crowd applauded. "Nyla taught me that medical expertise without humility is dangerous. Richard taught me that wealth without purpose is meaningless. Together, they've shown us all that when love and service combine, miraculous things happen." As the evening progressed, Nyla found herself talking with guests from every part of their journey: medical professionals who had implemented their training programs, foundation staff who had become like family, and community members from the clinics they had established. "Mrs. Blackwood," Miguel said, approaching her during a quiet moment, "how does it feel to be married to the man whose life you saved?" "It feels like the most natural thing in the world," Nyla replied, watching Richard across the room as he talked animatedly with a group of medical students. "We've been partners in everything for so long that marriage just makes it official." "And how does it feel to have your work recognized internationally?" "The World Health Organization wants to adopt your diagnostic protocols globally." Nyla smiled, still amazed by how far their impact had spread. "It feels like my grandmother's wisdom is finally getting the recognition it deserves. She always said that paying attention and caring deeply were the most important skills anyone could have." As the reception wound down, Richard and Nyla stood together on the mansion's terrace, looking out over the gardens where their wedding had taken place. "Any regrets?" Richard asked, pulling his wife close. "About marrying you?" "Never," Nyla laughed. "About wearing these shoes for 12 hours? Definitely." "I meant about everything," Richard clarified. "About leaving your old life behind, about taking on so much responsibility, about being in the public eye." Nyla considered the question seriously. Her life had changed beyond recognition. From struggling financially to having more security than she had ever dreamed of, from working alone to leading a team of dedicated professionals, from being ignored to being sought after for her opinions on healthcare policy. "The only regret I have," she said finally, "is that my grandmother didn't live to see this. She would have been so proud to know that her teachings about observation and compassion are now being used to train doctors around the world." "She did see this," Richard said softly. "Maybe not literally, but she planted the seeds of wisdom in you that made all of this possible. Every life our foundation saves is a testament to what she taught you." As they stood together under the stars, Nyla reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. A medical emergency that could have been a tragedy had instead become the foundation for a love story that was changing lives around the world. "What's next for us?" she asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "More of the same," Richard replied. "More partnership, more love, more work to help others. Maybe some children who we can teach to pay attention to the world around them and care deeply about other people. Children who understand that wisdom doesn't always come with credentials," Nyla added. "Children who know that love built on mutual respect and shared purpose is the strongest foundation for anything," Richard concluded. As they made their way back inside to thank their remaining guests and prepare for their honeymoon, Nyla felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path that had led her here. She had started as a maid who noticed things others missed. She was now a CEO, a wife, and a leader whose work was improving healthcare around the world. But most importantly, she was still the woman her grandmother had raised her to be. Someone who paid attention, cared deeply, and wasn't afraid to speak up when it mattered. The maid who had saved a millionaire's life had discovered that in saving him, she had also saved herself, finding love, purpose, and a future beyond her wildest dreams. Their story was just beginning.